Hello, everybody. For Stan and myself, it's good morning. It's actually a strange day. It's a Wednesday. It's not a Friday, Stan. We're
Oh,
into the summer months.
yeah, and it's 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning. And it's freezing in here.
Yeah, so welcome to the 120th edition of the Frankenstein chat. And believe it or not, there are one or two people who actually quite like it when it's just Frankenstein and we don't have any guests. But I have to say, the
Yeah,
recent guests we've had have been amazing. And also, I haven't told you, Stan, but actually the two most recent guests have had a big spike in viewing figures, and it's difficult to control who's who's
yeah.
downloading it, but actually, I suspect that those are reflected in the download figures as well. So, thank you to Cathal and thank you to Rebecca, who I actually listened to. Rebecca Leake was on Times Radio talking to another one of our guests, Adrian Lyons, a couple of nights ago. So that was really weird. But anyway, it just goes to
You
show.
have to butt in, Frank. Hey, just a minute.
I know, we set all this up. Anyway, interesting week. We're sort of like part way through the week, so it's a slightly different angle. We're not actually at the Friday yet, but how are you, Stan?
I'm okay. Tired from grandchild looking after, but
Yeah.
that's becoming a regular time that Wednesday's a bit of a dip after we've had Monday and Tuesday. But yeah, was at the caravan last weekend. Um,
The weather was great, wasn't it?
the weather was fantastic. It was cold,
Yeah.
but it was very sunny and I was able to get loads of jobs done. Well, I worked myself into the ground, really.
And then came back for 2 days of childcare. But
Yeah, yeah,
um, yeah, we've got a very lucky plot where our caravan is. It's nicely sheltered. So I actually was sitting, well, we were both sitting on the deck. But
the couple in the caravan behind us was. I had to have words with them to say this is not what it's about.
Anyway, so here we are, Wednesday, and I suppose I actually was out and about yesterday, so and that's going to lead into what's caught my eye this week. But let's go to you first, Stan. What's caught your eye this week?
Well, my love of leadership issues. I watched the Thames Water documentary over the last 2 nights on BBC and found it fascinating. You could use chunks of it as a real leadership lesson
Right.
in watching, I suppose, watching the top leaders defend their position without really understanding it appeared. I mean, all these appear, it depends how it's edited, etc. I understand that. But without appearing to think about what they were actually doing, more about defending what they're doing and how they're going to make this price rise work. And there was this distinct difference between the central CEO and team and those workers who were at at a low level, let's say. I won't say at
But
what level they were
what
at.
fixing pipes
Fixing
and
yeah.
unblocking drains and
And as I've always said, having some ideas which would well
mm,
serve the senior management. For example, this pump's broken now, so this is now out of action. We really ought to have a spare pump ready so we can just swap them over and send this one for repair. Instead, this is going to delay us, but senior managers won't pay for a spare pump to have on site. And you just think, and the same with clearing, emptying the tanks. He said a small investment, relative expensive, a couple of £100,000, I think he said, would make things very different.
mm.
And yet, it doesn't seem that they want to invest £200,000 in doing whatever he was. And his view was that would make it far more efficient, and they'd save money in the longer term.
It's
But
it.
I think what got me was the bubble that the senior managers seemed to be in, where it was the world against them, and it was all about arranging what you would say to the press.
Right.
And we've, you can see the press person saying, we all know our lines now, we all know what to say. Well, and here's your response when people say this. And there was one guy in it who said, "Can we not just say to them? look, the people in the past have have taken the money rather than invest in the plant. That's the past. We're now a different set of CEOs and everything, but that's where we are, and that's why we need to raise prices. And his boss kind of said, "Yeah, well, we'll maybe come to that." And well, it was in my view, a really sensible approach to take, to be honest about what had happened. And then there was the another a lady, I think she was in the finance team, who was saying, yes, but when 10 years ago it was a profitable company, and now it's 8 billion in debt,
Those,
something
yeah,
like
well,
that.
billions. Yeah.
Yeah, billions in debt. Um, and she kind of justified it by saying, but you were allowed to do that. And so, as a business, as any bank would do, they saw the opportunity to do what they did because the regulator didn't stop them, and they did it. And I just thought,
Well,
there's
oh God,
no moral
yeah, yeah,
doing that. There's not. It's we can, not should we.
yes.
Is it right to do that when, anybody can see a bit further down the line we're going to be short on infrastructure, we're going to have to invest a lot more money. And I just felt as though it was an isolated group at the senior level, some of whom were, I mean, I think they all were genuinely, felt responsibility for what was going on, particularly the pollution and everything. But they were so tied to defending the position that they just didn't come out and say, right, this is where we are. At one point, he did say, this is where we are. We want to get on with what we need to do next, but hadn't shared that in a way with the population, with the customers that said, this is what's and he sort of said it's a waste of time going back over the past and we don't want to do that. But people want to know what
Well,
where did it go from a profitable company to being massively in debt,
yeah.
and who was responsible for that? Because it may have been, it must have been legal. It must have been what the regulations said they could do, but nobody's sort of questioning the moral code of that and saying, as a company, should we have been doing that? And I think, whenever you read things about companies that go pop, it's usually the values and the morals that are the thing that start the trend down. I found it fascinating, and I found it worrying, and the levels of pollution they were showing were frightening. But you know, when the boss of a plant is going out and looking at the rain to see how much it's raining because he doesn't know whether they'd be able to pump it clear or not,
Oh
it
God.
just seemed amateur seemed to be
Yeah.
the way it looked.
Well,
Didn't look like a great professional organization.
well, I'll put this out here because I can then send it to somebody. But this all reminds me of Professor Marianne Jennings' book, The Seven Signs of Ethical Collapse. And I have tried, I've connected with Marianne, who's a professor out in the States, got close to her joining us for a chat. But she looked at all these major businesses, banks that went bust. And all this is a classic example where you've lost your moral purpose, and actually you've got CEOs whose interests are profit about against anything else, about shareholder dividends, thinking very short term, also just being concerned about a number, which is primarily, I think, profit and what they can draw out the business. And all of this is sort of part of the dynamics of the collapse, which it's great that this program has highlighted all of this. But in the
Well, as I said, Frank, you have to be careful with programs, don't you?
yeah,
Because
because it's
you're,
selective.
you're at the
Yeah,
bidding of the editor, and,
but
potentially a biased view from
yeah,
the way it was edited. I'm sure the people in it would say it wasn't fair showing that, and you've cut a bit off where
of
I
course.
said I really care
Yeah,
about.
there is a
I get,
narrative, isn't there, that they
yeah,
want to convey. But I would say though that And again, the other film that I regularly reference is The Inside Job, which was really the film about the financial crisis in 2008. And there, I can remember it, even in the trailer, you know, an economist was saying, but the regulators knew what was happening and they did nothing about it. Now,
Mm.
and actually you think, well, this is the moral purpose of a regulator as well. So there is an issue here around, and it gets me when and the regulator might say, well, it wasn't their decisions with regard to dividends and CEO pay, all that sort of stuff, that wasn't within our remit. But actually, if it's not within your remit and you can see this thing happening, this car crash happening, stand down.
Yeah.
Don't heed the regulator that is impotent, in terms of what it needs to be doing. So, and I, yeah, uh, it's sad, isn't it? It's sad, that we don't
Yeah,
have
and
much
in a
control.
way, I felt for the people who are now in charge because they've not been in charge for very long. They're new and they've got this mountain to climb of sorting it out. But I remember reading stuff from Andy Hargreaves that says you have to acknowledge the past. You
Yes,
celebrate what was good about the past, you acknowledge it, and you move on. You
yeah,
don't ignore the past because that's the worst thing you can do. I know when we work with schools, he used to do a thing where he talked about the oldest member, not the oldest, but the longest serving member of staff and good times and bad times in the school's history
mm,
before sort of saying, right, now we need to move on. So there's a connection with the past. And Thames Water did have glory days.
yes,
So why not look back at what was right at that point? But then you look and you say, well, the tanks that they're using were built in 1935.
yeah,
How much has London expanded since then?
yeah, no, but you get to a critical tipping point, don't you, with
Yeah,
businesses, and for them, that I think they've just secured, I think it was at 3 billion.
3 billion.
And actually there's now discussion about whether or not that's going to be sufficient. Um, but what we can't have is Thames Water going down. We can't have that imploding, can we? And actually what happens then is that, the shareholders who then think, well, water companies aren't worth investing because you never know whether you're going to lose all your money or not.
Yeah.
So therefore that impacts negatively on other water companies. We could argue whether or not they should have been privatized in the first place, but they have been,
Mm.
acknowledging the past. But there's a real, it's a real sensitive issue here around, wanting to highlight the weaknesses of Thames Water, but not doing it in such a way that you completely devastate the rest of the sector. So
Mm.
it's
Yeah, it's a lesson. I remember, I think it's a book on culture, I think, that talked about Johnson and Johnson as a company making a huge mistake. It was something to do with a product that they said that was faulty or didn't work. And it was, do we tell people about it or not? And do we retake in all the stock for literally millions, maybe billions of pounds? And the CEO said, we have to do that
mm,
because that's who we are.
yes,
So I think they nearly bankrupt the company getting something right.
right, right.
And as a result, got got trust in their customer base because they did things the right way morally.
Did you see connections between last night's programme with Thames Water and the post office inquiry? The way the post office managed it, or were they?
Yeah, there was that element of it's not denial. I'm not saying they were denying. It was circle the wagons and we'll defend our position rather than rather than being open about it and looking and saying, look, the infrastructure, so we can, yes, maybe
Mm,
they should have invested more in it, but they didn't, and that's not something we can undo.
yes,
I think people would like to know where the money went and who gained from it, because that's I think what riles people when they say, so I've now got to pay what,
yeah.
54% increase
Well,
in my water bill. because somebody mismanaged the money previously. I want to know who mismanaged the money
yeah,
before I pay. And it's about being, I think it's about being open and honest with your customers,
yeah,
as you would in a school. I mean,
yeah,
we like to bring it back to schools, but if you try and cover things up in a school rather than say, actually, we got this bit wrong,
yes,
made a mistake, you end up, well, you end up looking for another job if you're the head
yeah.
before long.
The thing is, if you don't draw a line, acknowledging the past and what went on and referencing it, then you're forever trying to draw a
Yeah,
line, So, and I've got a chat with Dave Smith from the co-op media team when I was there later today, and he always said, if you've got some bad news, get it all out in one go.
yeah,
Don't try and don't don't in a way just say I can get away with it. This is what I can get away with now. Because
yeah,
actually, if you're not absolutely clear about how bad it is and where some of the weaknesses were and what you intend to do, then actually you're just forever revisiting it, because people will feel as though you're only telling part of the story. And of course, the problem here is that if they haven't told the full story in the past, I think people like us and reporters will always be a bit suspicious about, well, is this? I
yeah,
think that's where the post office went badly wrong, trying
yeah,
to defend the position, but not actually saying, well,
yeah.
this is it.
And
This is
with
all
the
we know.
post office, although it's been denied, there was knowledge that things weren't right. There was
Yeah.
knowledge that they were doing things that were not morally right.
Yes.
There was prosecuting people when they knew there was a possibility that it was a systems failure rather,
Yes.
and that to me was the breaking point for the post office. Once you're prepared to do something that you know is morally wrong and potentially legally wrong, but you go ahead with it in order to cover up a position that you're trying to defend. I just think you,
Yeah. But I think if you chase the money, it's interesting. If you chase the money in Thames, you'll probably end up getting back to some small investors.
oh yeah, pension
But
companies and things.
pension co but actually, if we think that that's where all of that money's gone, I personally, I think that's been spread, and some people have done quite well out of this,
Hmm.
So,
Well, the
uh,
other thing that struck me was, they were fined for the pollution millions of pounds, and I just think there's not a lot of point, really, is there, in bailing a company out if you've got to bail it out and then fining them?
yeah,
Why didn't they, rather than fine them, say, right, your bill for polluting is whatever it was, 100 million. You've got to now give that back to your customers through a rebate.
yeah, 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 yeah,
So the government is going to get the millions, but you're still going to have to spend it, but you do it as a rebate to your
yes,
original
yes,
customers.
yeah, yeah,
So maybe they get a year of no water bills.
yeah, yeah,
Now that's a way to get your customers back on side.
yeah,
Yes, it
it
might
is,
go up next year, but this year we're
yeah,
not charging you.
yeah. The other side, though, is that for investors, they're thinking, right, I want out,
Yeah.
you know.
But I know they're not the same investors, but the investors that have had a good times
I
and then
agree. I agree.
got
I
out.
mean that's the problem though, Stan, isn't it? When you buy and sell shares and whatever, you're always looking for the quick. And well,
Yeah.
I don't have any, but
I know.
people look for
Yeah.
quick wins, and actually, what with a utility business like this, this is if you ought to really be looking for an investment over your lifetime if you intend. This doesn't seem to me to be the sort of place where you ought to be looking for quick wins because if that is what's driving your thinking, then that will feed into the AGM, what the CEO and the board are thinking about. Well, what's the dividend going to be this year? What can we get away with giving them?
But we get back then, though, Frank, to the short termism that I think hits education
Yeah,
hard,
yeah,
where people don't genuinely plan now for 3, 4, 5 years ahead. I'm not sure many head teachers plan when they're appointed to say, what do I want this school to look like when I move on?
yeah,
what's my grand plan for the school, or what's the governor's grand plan for the school, and how can I help before I move on? When I left headship, my chair of governors, who was interesting, let's say, brought my letter of application to my leaving do and read to the parents. You know that bit that you say, the end of your letter, you say, "This is what I'm going to do. My ambition will be X, Y." And he read
And
them out
how
as,
far short did you fall, Stan?
oh, it was okay. I wasn't far from it. But he read it out to the parents and said, "So has he achieved that one? Has he achieved that one?" Which
um,
I actually thought afterwards was quite clever.
yeah.
In terms of, because when the next person applies for the job, are we going to hold them to account to what they say in the application letter?
I
It
think it's
was, it was interesting. It did take me by surprise that he still had the letter.
I think it's interesting because I was speaking to somebody this week, and they were talking about not having a long-term 5-year plan, and they were saying that in essence what you've got is your values and your principles, which underpin what you do, and then opportunities arise, and depending on your values and your principles, you either step forward or you don't, and so in effect that's sort of like. Is
Yeah,
probably how most senior leaders are
yeah. The
working.
problem with it, Frank, is it's like deciding you were to drive to London and waking up in Edinburgh because the,
It
the
was,
motorway was clear and there were no traffic jams.
um, anyway, let me, because I'm conscious, we said we were going to just do a quite short, sharp one, but
Sorry.
no, it's 20 minutes already. So what caught my eye this week was, well, yesterday, the France's curriculum interim report came out, and I think it's been uh, Rebecca Front always said that she was going to make it more evolution than revolution. I think that has come through in what's being proposed. There are some sort of sticky issues that are emerging, particularly around post 16 and things like that. Um, but actually, one of the things that struck me was her statement that you know she's had a lot of representation both from the education field and non-education field, and so she's resisting the non-education viewpoint, not ignoring it. Don't you're not that, but actually weighting it more to the education field. Now,
We've
yes,
said that before, Frank, haven't we? That there's this massive emphasis on some qualifications that in many cases nobody ever asks you about for the rest of your life. It's a stepping stone, and for some reason we seem to make it just hard to get past those stepping stones
yes,
for reasons. And I suspect the reason is because people assume it was harder for them when they did it. I think that's part of the way there is thinking. Well,
yeah,
I didn't, you see it now. I didn't get any help with my O levels. I had to revise every night, but all nonsense. But therefore, it's got to be just as hard. And I think on the e-bike, what gets me is the kind of people who, like famous Mr. Gove, who doesn't want some of the softer subjects, the arty subjects involved, fails to realise that it probably his heroes, the Victorians,
yes,
they didn't, Isambard Kingdom Brunel could draw and draw with artistic flair, could write things with artistic flair because that his training, his preparation was not just about engineering.
yeah,
It was a broad brush. I mean, if you look at most of the Victorian buildings and bridges, and they're designed above and beyond what they needed to do. They're
yes,
not utilitarian. They are, in many cases, pieces of art,
yes.
and that's completely missed, it seems, by people who think, art, music, all soft things. We don't want those in a tough
I know, but
baccalaureate.
there were obviously we had some people from a range of businesses and sort of local authority stuff there, and that came through very strongly yesterday. So let's be honest, Stan. I don't think you or I would really have welcomed it being the Stan Johnson curriculum review and having to write a draft report.
No, no, no.
So I do have, I mean, I'm just making the point. I do have sympathy for the task, the person doing it and the task. I just think yesterday, because it has been generally well received, and I
Mm,
thought, it's probably she's avoided some of the more tricky issues with the draft report, but actually, yesterday probably was an indication that it might not, when the final thing is delivered, it might not go far enough, and it will be an interesting sort of balancing act between, if she's receiving feedback which is very positive, which I think I've read is very positive, that's going to get hearten her and enable her to progress that route further down the line. I'm not sure,
yeah.
whether we'll have enough teeth, enough change for some of those, the most, the children that need it the most, to be honest.
Mm. Yeah, but again, we've said this numerous times. We can look at results, we can look at performance. Nobody really, maybe the Northern Powerhouse is doing it, has looked at, let's look at poverty, let's look at
Yeah.
performance, let's look at housing, let's look at performance. You know, maybe they coalesce.
Yes.
I mean, the DFE have put something out this last week about attendance that suggests that 2 days, 3 days off school affects your final GCSE results because it suggests it's not a correlation but a causation.
Yes. Yeah, I saw that.
And I just think that was poor in my view
Yeah. Yeah.
because I genuinely do not believe that a few days off school makes that much difference.
Yeah. I do worry about what message. I know what they're trying to do, but I worry about the messaging for those children for whom they are genuinely ill or they're suffering from some condition or whatever. The thought that you're hearing the government saying, well, if you miss 2 or 3 days, when actually you've just had 3 or 4 weeks because you've had a major operation, what is that? What is that actually saying? To some of the most vulnerable kids in the system at the moment. If I heard that, I'd be, throw a towel in. What's the
Yeah,
point?
well, and school isn't. There's nothing attracting me to school.
Yeah, I know.
Therefore, I'm now being told that because I've already taken several days off, I won't achieve anything.
Yeah,
I always remember a lecturer from it's from Wales, a professor, talking about boys' achievement and saying, yeah, boys like competition. Boys do, are competitive. And then he said, until the point where they don't think they can win.
yeah,
So they're only competitive if you think you've got a chance of
yeah,
winning.
yeah.
And the moment, in general terms, the moment boys know they can't win, give up,
I know. I
do
think
something else.
one of the things then is, around. Do you actually think that too many young people work out that they're not going to succeed in the system, and therefore, because the system is always designed to produce kids who don't make they don't
Yeah.
get to level 4, but do you think that actually plays into it, or am I just
I think,
overstating that as
I think,
like,
unfortunately, Frank, I think we still think of a process, a system where you do well at school and you go into a job and you make the harder you work, the more things you get, the better chance you've got of life chances. When in fact, what kids see, particularly in tough areas, say, if I sell drugs,
yeah,
I can have a fast car. I can be earning more money than my dad ever earned
yeah,
in a fortnight.
yeah,
So, what I do at school relates in no way to a way I can work. Let's look at YouTube influencers.
mm,
So my job that I've created is to go on YouTube and tell people what to wear and show people different hairstyles. And I'm making more money than somebody who's gone to university with a view to becoming a doctor or something. So
yeah,
I think. until we really, and I'm saying me rather than we, understand what life is like as a 15, 16, 17-year-old in different circumstances, then we don't know what school needs to prepare them for and what
No.
schools need to prepare them against.
It's funny, I can link now because this is coming to an end, but I can link that point with your first point about Thames Water and the CEO. And, to me, if the CEO had actually understood what life was like fixing the sort of leaks, trying to resolve the issues around have we got enough pumps, if they actually did more work and actually had an understanding what life was like for those people who are probably some of the lower paid workers in the organization,
Mm.
there's a chance, isn't there, that they would
What was
be in a better
interesting
position to make the right decision as opposed to the quick buck decision,
in the first instance, the first episode rather, it's one water treatment plant north of London, and the boss there was in his 20s, and he was going out and fixing things and getting his hands dirty and
Right.
dealing with it. And then the end of the episode is him giving his notice in and going.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I do think there's that, and we like to relate it to schools and education. It is about knowing what goes on at ground and not pretending you know. Go and ask.
Yes.
Go and and make your decisions based on what the experts at ground level are telling you, not what's up here thinking. I remember that one week I had working with the caretaker, and I know what everything about that in that week. No, just walk the school with your caretaker and
Yeah.
say, if you had some money to improve things, what would you do?
Yeah.
Just same with the admin team, same with teachers, same with teaching assistants. Ask them what would make this better for you
Yeah.
or for the
Yeah.
school, and they'll tell you.
Yeah. Right. That's the end of the 220th edition, Stan. Having said we were going to have a short one there, we're into nearly 40 minutes, so
But,
on two issues in effect.
yeah, it's
Um,
because we've not had guests interrupting us
I
for it.
know, yeah. So what we've got next week on the Frankenstein chat is we have, I think, two or three guests joining us, and we're going to be talking about relational inclusion. So we've been approached by these colleagues who want to chat about it. So we're going to give them platform. Stan and I have not met them before, but there is some material that they've shared with us. So we'll be doing our prepping in advance of the meeting so that we know exactly what's going on. But yeah, thank you everybody. And one
Yeah,
final, can I just say,
yeah.
one final plug, not final, but for this week. If you haven't completed the alternative big consultation, which is something that I'm organising with Professor Colin Richards, which runs alongside the Ofsted survey, then please do so. I'll put a link at the end of this video. We we have no budget for this. We're just doing it. We need people like you, if you're watching or listening, just to encourage your friends to complete it. We don't mind what the responses are. We just want a genuine response, but we need the numbers in, and yeah, just to make sure that what Ofsted delivers is actually reflective of the responses that they've had and that the sector has towards their proposals. So anyway, so please do. It only takes 5 minutes. Okay, until next week then, Stan.
Yeah, cheers.
Goodbye from him and it's goodbye from me. Yeah, okay, take care everybody.